Okay, this video is going to explain how the normalization process works with regards to a question from the 2015 CCEA SSD A21 paper. So normalization is the process of decomposing a flat file database essentially into a series of interrelated tables, and there's typically a four-step process that you need to follow, beginning with unnormalized form, working through first, second and third normal form. So in the question you're given this essentially a data capture form, and the data capture form shows all the details that are recorded, in this case for a hire agreement. And the first thing you should do when you're looking at this type of question is identify the fields that you need to store in your database, and also the fields that you don't need to store in your database, because not necessarily everything will be stored in your final version of your database. So if I look through this particular form, I see that I guess it's also a good starting point to get a sense of what the database is about. So in terms of what data is going to be stored, and also to think conceptually about potentially what tables you might have. So as I look at this data capture form, I see certainly three distinct tables. I see a hire table, I see a client table, and I see an equipment table. And now that's not necessarily going to be the final destination, but it gives you a sense of what tables might exist in your final database, and that should give you some steer as to what tables should come out, certainly by third normal form. So if I look at what this particular data capture form is about, it's about hire agreements. And if I look here at the top left hand corner, I see a hire agreement number. So hire agreement number is a key field. Everything is related to the hire agreement number. Now what they do in exam questions sometimes is they try and mask this primary key field by not putting it where you would expect it to be. Sometimes they don't put it in as the first column, or they don't put it up in the top left hand corner. Sometimes it's buried in the form. So don't let that disguise or put I guess conceal the importance of that field, and it's a good idea to get a sense of which field everything else pivots around. So in this case it's the hire agreement number. I'm also looking at this form and I'm looking for fields that I'm not going to store. And if I look here, we have client details, I need to store that, equipment product code, description, cost of hire, that's all fine. And I'll see this field here at the bottom, total cost, and total cost is anything subtotal, total cost, amount outstanding, things like that. Those are typically calculated fields, or derived fields sometimes they're known as. And a derived or calculated field is a field that you do not need to store in your database, because it can be calculated or worked out or derived from existing fields. So for example, in this case, the cost of hire, I could calculate the total cost from adding together the cost of hire of these five pieces of equipment. As I also look around the data capture form, I see that potentially there is some atomization required. And atomization is where you break the fields down into their constituent parts. Now, for exam purposes, you don't necessarily have to do that, okay? Because what it does, it just expands your list of fields. So for example, if I look at name, now we would never store name as name in a database. We would store name as first name and surname. Similarly, address, in this case it's 10 Seaview Drive. It doesn't give a town or a city or a postcode, and I guess that would be fine. But if we were developing a database for real, we would want to atomize that data to store it as first name and surname, and address is address line 1, address line 2, town, city, postcode, etc. And the reason for that, why we atomize data, is to allow that data to be sorted, ordered in a particular way, or to allow for grouping, or to allow better search capabilities. So you can search for walkers, or you can search for people that live in Bangor. And it becomes more difficult whenever you're looking for a particular, for example, where someone lives, the town that they live in. If that town is buried, so to speak, within the full address, and then you're having to extract the data for that particular attribute, and then look for a word within that particular attribute. So that's, I guess, a wee bit of the preamble in terms of understanding what the database is about, looking at what the key field is, what everything pivots around, looking at what fields I might need to atomize. I'm not going to atomize anything in this particular example, and also looking for derived or calculated fields. So on normalized form, I guess the whole purpose of that is to list all the fields that you need to store in the database and atomize the data. If I can spell that properly. In this case, we're not going to atomize the data. We're going to list all the fields. And the fields, I'm just going to call this the table higher. That's the first thing you need to put in normalization. You need to put the name of the table. So if I just spread that out. And the fields that I'm going to store, and I'm just going to abbreviate them here. So let's call hire, agree number, date of hire, EPC, oh no, let's go client details, client ID, client name, client address, EPC or equipment product code, description, cost of hire, and that's it. So I'm not going to atomize name, I'm not going to atomize address, or I'm not going to store total cost, because total cost is a derived field. So that's my unnormalized form. That's all I have to do, is just list all the fields that I'm going to store, and also identify, I guess, a notional primary key. And the notional primary key in this case is going to be my hire agreement number. Now I'm doing it in Microsoft Excel just to, I guess, structure it and allow you to give you some sense of the process. Obviously in an exam situation you're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to put it into a table, although some of you might want to scribble on a page some sample data, and that's fine, but you've got to be conscious of the fact that these questions are typically 12 marks, 9 and 12 marks, which gives you roughly, in a 100-mark paper, which is 2 hours, roughly about 15 minutes to do it. Okay, so now this video is going to be about 15-20 minutes long. Obviously you're doing a lot of the thinking on the hoof here, so you just need to be conscious of the time you're spending on this. So that's unnormalized form. If I in first normal form is the conditions of first normal form are remove repeating attributes, and before I leave, then I need to assign the primary key, assign keys, and that's primary and foreign. Okay, and remember, foreign keys are denoted by at least the last in the last version of the CCEA past papers, they were denoted by a hashtag, and primary keys are denoted by underlining. Typically the primary keys are listed at the fore of the table, the front of the table, the start of the table, and the foreign keys are listed at the end of the table. So that is the definition of first normal form. In terms of how we actually remove repeating attributes then, well, we've got to think about what is a repeating attribute. And a repeating attribute are any attributes which repeat around a particular key field. And we see that for a hire agreement, in this case hire agreement 456, we have multiple, and maybe multiple is a term that makes more sense in a way. We have multiple items that can be bought for a particular hire agreement. So in that sense, then we have equipment product code, description, and cost of hire. Those are repeating attributes. Now, just to give you, and this is why again we're using a spreadsheet to show you what this means in a sense. So if I type in hire agreement 456 and I type in the 1204 2015 client ID 56 Wendy Walker and CView Drive DRA, client name and EPC, and it's AC2566157. I'm actually putting it in exactly as it appears just for completeness. And then we have another item, RG 53652 regulator. And apologies, I know this is a bit time consuming. I'll be as quick as I can. BW 56265 belts and heights 10. If I've made any mistakes here, don't worry about it. I guess it's just really understanding the concept of a repeating attribute, which is where typically students go wrong. They identify the wrong repeating attributes, and then their first and second normal forms are incorrect, and they lose 6 marks. Not to say that they won't get the final answer, but there are marks for the working out, essentially. There are marks for your, the various stages. I don't know why that is. At the end of the day, as long as you get a database which satisfies third normal form, it shouldn't make any difference how you got there, but it does. And not only CCEA, but any exam board will give you marks for the process. Now, in terms of repeating attributes, if we just look at what's going on here we have for a particular hire, these are repeating. So you have repeatable or multiple items attached to this hire. And if this was stored in a flat file database, this would have to be attached to a record. Okay, so we would need to attach it to a record. We can't have any blank spaces in a flat file. So if we were attaching that is repeating essentially for the same hire. Now I know you're saying, oh, well, is that not repeating attributes? Because that is essentially repeating. But the term repeating attributes means that there are multiple items for any one particular instance, attribute instance. So in this case, for any one particular hire agreement, you might have multiple items that are attached to that. So if we are removing repeating attributes, we need to remove those fields to a new table which are repeating. So I'm just going to put in my hire table, and I'm going to just copy these in here initially. So what is repeating? So clearly these 3 fields are repeating attributes according to the definition. So I need to remove those to a new table, along with a copy of the notional field, the notional primary key field. And the purpose of that is then that allows you then to maintain a link between the two tables. So it's a relational database. You need to have that link that keeps the data, the relationships pervasive, keeps them, they exist then once the tables are broken down. So you can get data from one table into another through common fields. So I've removed the repeating attributes. I've removed a copy of the field around which they repeat. And you only have to remove one field, and it's the most important field, the notional primary key field to your new table. And as I said, that allows you to maintain a link between the two tables. Now, before I leave this particular normal form, I have to assign the keys, both the primary and the foreign keys. So if I look at this table, this is essentially all I see here. Now, in this table, clearly this is repeating data, and I won't necessarily need to have that repeating data. I will just have one record. If I have one record in this new table, which field then will uniquely identify each hire agreement? Well, that will be hire agreement number. So I can say that is my primary key field. Does it have any foreign keys? No, it doesn't. This table, if I look at this table, and clearly it hire agreement number is still going to be at least part of the primary key. So if I take this, if I put in 456, for example, and I put in these details in here, you'll see that 456, because I can't have any blanks in there, 456 cannot be a primary key, because 456 is repeating, and it's not unique to each row. So multiple rows might have 456 as their value. Similarly, if I had another hire agreement number, what's to say that that person doesn't buy exactly the same things? In which case, I can't use equipment product code in isolation as a primary key field, because potentially it would repeat. However, and again, there's always some assumptions you have to make, and based on the data that's provided. And the assumption I'm going to make here is they haven't put in a quantity field to indicate the number of air cylinders or the number of regulators that I'm going to hire. So I'm just going to assume that that's just left out of it for whatever reason. And I'm going to assume that you can only buy one item. You can only hire one item. In which case then that would allow me to say then that a combination of the hire agreement number and the equipment product code are a primary key field, because the combination of those two fields is not going to repeat. Now, you could argue that, well, what if the person wants to hire another air cylinder? Then for that particular hire agreement number, that equipment product code is actually going to repeat. And this is what really annoys me sometimes about the papers, that they aren't specific, because what's to say a student doesn't make that assumption? However, that's maybe an assumption, a large assumption to make. So we're going to make the assumption, which is a reasonable, in a court of law, it's a reasonable person, a rational person would say, and we're going to make the assumption that hire agreement number and EPC will be what's known as a composite key. Now, not only are they a composite key, but then we need to think about, well, is there any foreign keys in there? Well, hire agreement number is a foreign key because it's a primary key in this table, and we took a copy of that with us into our table and to maintain that link. So that becomes a foreign key. So am I going to close the door on first normal form where there's only two tables? I have applied the two rules of first normal form, so I'm happy, except I need to give this this table a name. I'm going to call it hire equipment, and typically the table name is not really hugely important, to be honest. it's just good practice to give it a name that reflects the data that's stored in that table. So that's first normal form done. Second normal form, I'm just going to copy these fields in here, just so I don't have to do any formatting. And second normal form is where you're removing partial key dependencies. I'll just spell that right. You still have to assign the primary keys and foreign keys before you leave that form. Now, if you're in second normal form, it is assumed that you satisfy the conditions of first normal form. So a table that is in second normal form is by definition also in first normal form. So removing partial key dependencies, what does that actually mean? Well, a partial key dependency is any field which is dependent upon a subset of the primary key for its value. In other words, any attribute which has a closer relationship, has a full functional dependency upon a subset of the primary key. So by implication, subset would indicate that you have more than one field in that table. So in other words, any table that has a single field primary key is already in second normal form. And that is why it is so important that you assign the primary keys correctly in first normal form. You really think about it. And that's why I put that data into first normal form, to help you think about it. In the exam, you're not going to have a chance to do it in a spreadsheet. You're going to have to think about it in your head. Can this data repeat? Yes, it can. Well, then I can't use that field in isolation. Is there, the combination of the two fields, is the data likely to repeat in that? No, it's not. Then I can assign those as a composite key. So what I'm looking here is remove partial key dependencies. Are there any fields in these tables which are linked to a subset of the primary key? Well, already this particular table is in second normal form because it has a single field primary key field. This table is a candidate because it may be in second normal form, it may not. And what I'm looking for, are there any fields in this table or any attributes in this table which are linked to one of the primary key fields? Now, if we go back up here, I know these are sort of abbreviated, but if we look here, cost of hire and description, those are linked to equipment product code. So cost of hire and description are linked to equipment product code, which is a subset of the primary key. So they have a relationship with equipment product code that they don't have with the hire agreement number. They are fully dependent upon the equipment code. So in other words, if I change the equipment product code, the description will change every single time. If I search for this particular equipment product code, it will bring up regulator and it will bring up the cost of hire 15 every single time. So in other words, I'm removing these to a new table. And now I'm leaving behind a copy of this field in second normal form. I'm leaving a copy behind to maintain that link because I know where I'm going with this. I know there is going to be an equipment table that's just going to have a primary key. It's not going to have a foreign key because it's an outlier table. Because it's a table that's going to exist on the, if you think about it, an ERD, it's going to outlie on the edges. And any table that outlies on the edges is always on the one side of the relationship. And any table that exists on the one side of the relationship doesn't have foreign keys. It's only in tables that have that are on the many side of the relationship that have foreign key fields. So I'm going to remove a copy of those to a new table. I'm going to call this equipment. And before I leave, I need to assign the primary keys. Well, that table is done because that hasn't changed. This table now, well, actually it's got higher agreement number, which is a foreign key, and now EPC becomes a foreign key. It's in a table to which it doesn't belong. It's an alien. It's there just to allow you to link the higher agreement to the equipment. So it now becomes a foreign key, and this EPC in this table, it belongs here. It's not foreign. It's a primary key, and I've assigned it as a primary key. So can I close the door in second normal form? Yes, I can. I've assigned the primary keys, I've assigned the foreign keys. Now I can move on to third normal form. And the third normal form is, again, if I just copy that in here, is where you are removing partial transitive dependencies. And again, like all normal forms, I assign the primary keys and the foreign keys. What is a transitive dependency? A transitive dependency is any attributes, non-key attributes, which are dependent upon, fully functionally dependent upon other non-key attributes for their value. So, I guess by process of deduction, I see that this particular table doesn't have any non-key attributes. So therefore, I know it's in third normal form. This table here has two non-key attributes, cost of hire and description, and I know that they're fully functionally dependent upon equipment product code. Therefore, I'm happy that they're in third normal form. This table, potentially, it's not fait accompli, it's not for certain that it is not in third normal form, but potentially it has a number of non-key fields, and therefore potentially there are some transitive dependencies. So if I go back up to here, I know I'm using abbreviations for each of these attribute names. So if I think about this here, so client ID, client name, client address is stored with the hire agreement number and date of hire. Now, the address and name are both fully functionally dependent upon the client ID. So there is a relationship there between those two fields, those two attributes, to this attribute, which is also a non-key field. So that relationship, if I change the client ID, it would always return a particular client name who lives at a particular address. Okay, as long as you have, I guess, designed your database correctly. So, in other words, I am removing these fields to a table, and this is going to be my client table, and I'm going to leave behind, to maintain a link, I'm going to leave behind a copy of the field that allows me to link the hire to the client. And am I happy with that's all I need to remove? Yes, I am. And now I'm going to assign the primary and foreign keys. Well, nothing's going to change except now this is now a foreign key. It's in a table to which it doesn't belong. There's no other information about a client. It's foreign. This table here contains all the information about the client ID. It's going to be an outlier table. It's going to be a table on the, if you think of our ERD, it's going to be a table, an entity that exists on the fringes, if you like, of our ERD. It's going to be on the one side of the relationship, whereas client ID is going to be on the many side of relationship, and then any field is on the many side of relationship. If it has a link to an entity on the one side of relationship, it's always going to be a foreign key. So on this table here, this now becomes my primary key field, because each row will have a unique client ID, and each row will contain only information all about the one client. So has that satisfied the conditions of third normal form? Yes, it has. I've removed transitive dependencies and assigned the primary keys, and a database that's in third normal form is by definition in second normal form and by definition in first normal form.